might have heard, there's a council by-election taking place here next week. As the Alba candidate for Broxburn, Uphall and Winchborough, I'm privileged to have been invited to say a few words before I hand over to our distinguished panel. Or maybe just Kenny, who knows? I'm standing in next Thursday's by-election for the Alba Party on a number of very important local issues. Securing vital help for families during the cost of living crisis, provision of better and more reliable public transport for the area, finding creative solutions to the current housing shortages in the ward, and helping local people make their homes more energy efficient, finding lasting solutions to the problems of fly tipping and littering in the area, and asking questions of developers and demanding reassurances for residents who are concerned about local developments. All of these issues are of massive importance, and my promise to the people of this ward is that if elected, I'll give them my urgent and unwavering attention. I'll be asking some very difficult questions, and I won't accept any further excuses for inaction from the Tory and Labour coalition running West Lothian Council. However, that being said, it's been impossible to ignore the national issues which have been making the headlines over the last few weeks. So I also wanted to explain a little bit about why I'm standing for Alba in this by-election. I strongly believe there's never been a more important time to stand up and be counted. We're living through the turbulence of an energy crisis and the soaring cost of living. Workers' demands for fair pay go unanswered, while the pressure on our NHS reaches unprecedented levels, and we're seeing the undermining of women's rights. We can and should be doing so much better for Scotland and the Scottish people. In the last couple of weeks alone, we've seen a determination to rush legislation through the Scottish Parliament without adequate scrutiny and debate, risking the safeguarding of women and girls as a result. And just in the last couple of days, we've seen the folly of leaving Scotland's constitutional future in the hands of the UK Supreme Court, rather than it being determined by the people of Scotland through their elected national parliament. Those of us who believe that Scotland should be an independent country must now take absolutely every opportunity to make our voices heard loud and clear. Recent events have crystallised our purpose and our determination. For me, that begins with the by-election in this ward next Thursday. The 2014 independence referendum energised and revitalised Scotland's political landscape. But since then, Scottish politics has stagnated, and the case for independence hasn't always evolved to meet the challenges we now face in 2022. That's why we're delighted you're joining us tonight to discuss the Alba book, The Updated Case for a Forward-Looking and Independent Scotland. We hope you enjoy the evening.
Community Centre for the 41st wee Alba book meetings around Scotland. A very important one, the first one in the lee of the Supreme Court trying to tell folk in Scotland they're a second-class nation. I think you'll find tonight in Uphall we've got different ideas. So enjoy yourself and watch on.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Tasmina, Ahmed-Sheikh, and I have the privilege of being your chair this evening. Apologies for the late entrance. Alex was just finishing off an interview. Now, I missed hearing from you, Debbie, but hopefully during some of the questions we get a chance to hear from Debbie, who of course is a wonderful Alba candidate for the upcoming by-election next Thursday, just 6 days away in Broxburn, Uphall and Winchborough. It has been a really interesting week. To say the very least, I had the privilege in 2014 of being on the board of Yes Scotland, and the image of that campaign for me, and something I wrote about in my article in the National this week, was a picture of a parent and child's hand where we said it's time to take Scotland's future into Scotland's hands. Now this week has felt, for reasons beyond my comprehension, and remain beyond my comprehension, find ourselves in a situation where we put our future in the hands of others. And that shouldn't have happened, mustn't continue, and therefore today, part of today, is about establishing how we retain Scotland's future into Scotland's hands and bring Scotland's future back into Scotland's hands, which is where it should be. Frankly, it should be nowhere else. And I hope today's meeting gives us an opportunity to do that. Now, of course, who better to discuss how we do that, and indeed the case for Scottish independence, which becomes more and more important and essential day by day, as we shouldn't let the cost of living crisis escape us. We have, of course, as well as Debbie, Ewen joining us, Kerry MacAskill and Alex Salmond. And I'm going to start by introducing Kenny and ask him if he will say a few words. You'll recognise Kenny, of course, from sometimes it turns up to Westminster and Townsend, sometimes it tells him where to go, and we much love him for that. So let's hear from Kenny MacAskill.
Thank you very much. It's good to be back here in Uphall. It's many years since I've been here. I'm going to deal with just one issue and one issue only, because that one issue makes a case for Scottish independence. It's the issue of energy. Because Scotland is energy rich, and yet our people are fuel poor. It's been cold today. The wind always blowing along the high street in Dunbar. I've had my heating on because I've been doing a washing. I'm able to pay the bill as I see the smart meter ratchet up. Lots of other people won't have been able to put their heating on. They're what they call self-disconnection, a euphemism for poverty that is enforced. There is no need for that. They don't even have the benefit of an ermine-robed robe from a Supreme Court judge or whatever else to keep them warm. They're simply going cold. Scotland is energy rich. Our people are fuel poor. That is simply absurd. Without the powers of independence, that won't change. Now, why are we fuel poor at the present moment? Well, it's not all down to President Putin and a war in Ukraine. Of course, that's had a knock-on effect. And of course, when you tie your electricity prices to the price of European gas, there's a factor there. But that's only a small factor because prices in Europe haven't gone up the same as prices here. So it's not that. It's not that the UK government is showing us great bounty and munificence. Because let's remember that they've still got VAT, albeit at a reduced rate, on energy bills. So the Chancellor's getting 5% of ever rising bills. They're getting money back in huge amounts from us, and they're failing to tackle the real needs, the abject needs in poverty. They've still not addressed the issue of those on prepayment meters paying a higher standing charge, and yet they're invariably the poorest and the ones who are most vulnerable. They've not addressed unregulated fuels, and if you think electricity and gas have gone up, those of you on unregulated fuels such as heating oil, and that's some 7% of households in Scotland, not just up in the north of Scotland, closer to where the energy is often produced, but even down here. I've got a lot of my constituency in the rural villages, will be the same in West Lothian as it is in East Lothian. They're not able to order or pay their bills because of the amount that they're required to meet, and the support being given by the government is derisory. So why are we there? There's one situation that I've come across that encapsulates the absurdity. It's situated an offshore wind farm called near Nagrave. It's 10 miles off the Fife coast. The energy from it is coming ashore at Torness, some 20 miles away. If you go to the village of Innerwick, just off the A1, you see the site for a transmission station being there. What does it provide? It provides electricity for 375,000 homes. 375,000 homes, every home in Uphall, Broxburn, Winchborough, Livingston, down into Falkirk can be provided. Who owns it? EDF and ESB. Who are they? One's the State Electricity Company of France, and the other's the Electricity Board of the Republic of Ireland. The profits from that offshore wind farm aren't coming to Edinburgh or even to London. They're going to Dublin and to Paris. Oh well, don't worry, we're told. We'll get the business and the jobs. Well, where are the turbines being manufactured? 54 of them being manufactured for that offshore wind farm. You would think you might consider Methil or places like that, because after all, Bifab's lying empty and there's people there with skills to build them. You even see a turbine land standing at Methil, not far from the football stadium. All 54 are being built in Hull. The only part of the contract coming to Scotland will be to assemble them at the port of Dundee. The high-value contracts are in construction. The high-value wages are in construction, not in assembly. And it's not just the turbines, because the cables are going to Belgium or to Spain. The nautical work is going to Norway with Fred Olsen. Oh well, the Scottish Government say, we'll just have to beef up in that, but we'll get the jobs. But you know, I've got constituents, because 35, in fact 36 workers on a ship in that offshore wind farm have all been laid off and have been replaced by Filipino labour, paid just over £3 an hour. So we're not even getting the jobs. That was only one ship. There's at least 2 other ships laying off Scottish and UK workers as we speak. So there we have something that should be able to provide for every home in this community at cost or just a marginal charge, certainly affordable to everybody, even those on benefits or a pension. We're not getting any benefit from it, we're getting no revenue from it, we're getting no contracts from it, and we're getting no jobs from it. And that's only one small wind farm. Next to it's another wind farm called the Berwick Bank. Now, Berwick Bank isn't located down by Berwick upon Tweed, it's actually closer to North Berwick, it's at the mouth of the estuary of the Firth. It's also just slightly south of that one I was talking about. It provides, not for 375,000 homes, it provides for 2.8 or 2.9 million homes. That's the energy it's capable of providing. We've only got 2.4 million households in Scotland. It alone provides more energy than we require. And what's happening with that? Are the turbines coming here? Nope. They're going abroad. Where's the revenue going? Well, that's going to the big corporations. What's happening in terms of other work in East Lothian? Because it too's coming in East Lothian. I don't see any jobs coming. Any construction jobs are going to contractors and they're coming in from the west of Scotland or more often from the north of England or even from Ireland. The jobs aren't going to local communities. And what's happening when it comes ashore? They're building a transmission station just next to the A1 because they are cabling it from Torness down to Redcar. And at the same time, a cable is being laid in Peterhead to take the energy from Caithness Bay and other things like offshore wind farms you see out of Aberdeen. That's going down to Drax near Hull. And actually part of Berwick Wind Farm is also 40% of it is going straight down to Blyth. Are we getting any revenue? The Scottish Government's getting zero. Marine Scotland's getting zero. The Crown Estate's get a few bob for some of the hassle of having the cable come ashore. They don't get anything for the 40% that goes directly straight down to Blyth. We get absolutely zero. We're getting no work and no contracts. Now that's the fault of the UK government. But we had a Scotland auction just a few months back where it was the Scottish Government in charge of putting out offshore wind farms running right up the North Sea and round into the Atlantic. And what did they do? They decided to have an auction. Now I go to a lot of auctions at events, many of you will. Sometimes there's quite fancy prizes. And usually they'll get somebody who'll say, I want a floor price. Do you know what the Scottish Government did with the Scotland auction? They put a cap, a maximum price. They'd actually had to cancel the auction once already because they realised they were going to get a paltry amount. But they went alive with the auction and they said, this is the maximum you need bid. Don't bother bidding any more than that. We don't want you to give us any more money. That's the maximum you need to give. Just give that. And of course, you might have seen the First Minister and indeed other ministers trumpeting that we got £700 million. Now that's not to be sniffed at. There's a lot you can do with £700 million. The problem was, some 4 weeks after the Scotland auction, New York State put up for auction one quarter of what we auctioned in Scotland and sold off for £700 million. And do you know what they received? They didn't cap it. They're the land of the free market. They said, no, highest bidder will get it, not just somebody else. They got $4.3 billion. So we got $700 million for 4 times as much, and they got for a quarter $4.3 billion. A hell of a lot of money, even with the pound having crashed against the dollar. That was utterly shameful. I've been told by Kate Forbes and John Swinney, oh well, we're going to get the contracts. Where are we getting the contracts? The only turbines I know to be manufactured will be Roy McGregor doing some 20 up at Nick Bay. Everything else, near Growth, Berwick Bank, everything else, it's Hull, it's Newcastle, it's the Netherlands, it's even Indonesia. There isn't any jobs, there isn't any revenue, it's utterly scandalous, and that cannot be allowed to go on. We should be energy rich. We should be getting the revenues from this. We should, we are being belittled. Again, you'll have seen that there's some suggestion that there's lies being told that Scotland doesn't have 25% of Europe's offshore wind potential. Now, that's been accepted as being a figure that isn't correct anymore. Although I have to say it wasn't just the Scottish Government that invented it on the back of a fact packet. It was actually put forward also by the European Government and even by a Deputy Prime Minister at one period, and indeed even a few weeks back I raised it in Parliament and nobody challenged me, certainly not the UK Minister. But I accept it's not 25%, nobody knows. What it is a huge, significant resource, because yet again in our history, probably for the first time in our history, our geography and our climate is to our advantage. Throughout our history we've been distant from markets, whether in Europe or whether in America. Suddenly we're where it matters for wind and indeed for tidal and other opportunities. The climate that we've complained about and complaining about today, all of a sudden that's to our benefit. So whether it's 25%, whether it's 20%, whether it's 30%, I don't know. I don't criticise the civil servants because when they brought that figure in, nobody really knew about offshore wind. It's why we're not getting any benefit. I'm arguing for East Lothian at the present moment. Anybody who goes to Shetland knows that Shetland has facilities that came about because they get a bit of revenue from the oil and gas that comes ashore. They have facilities that West Lothian, certainly East Lothian, would die for. They have buses that run early to late to small villages. They have schools in small communities. They have sports facilities in small communities that even big communities here would give their eye teeth for. They've got that because they've got a share of revenue. East Lothian doesn't get a share of revenue. No county in Scotland's getting a share of offshore wind because although there's provision legally for onshore wind, when they brought in the legislation, nobody thought there would ever be offshore wind. So there's no legislation for offshore wind. So we have to have some benefit, not just for the Scottish Government, but for Scottish communities, because we are not getting our benefit. That's just offshore wind. We've got 60% of the UK's onshore wind, and there's more to come. So we should be able to heat our homes, provide electricity, if not at cost price, certainly just at a slight price above it. It should be available, cheap. We should be getting revenue. We should be having a state government, because we were promised by the SNP. We were promised to be a state energy company. The Welsh are doing it. Why are the Welsh doing it? It's not to try and be a competitor to Scottish Power or anything like that. It's to take a stake in offshore wind. The Welsh have seen the opportunities in the Celtic Sea. It's nothing like the opportunities that we have in the North Sea and the Atlantic, but they'll be taking a stake, and it's time that we took a stake. It's time that our government insisted that contracts went to local firms, that BIFAB, that Arnish, that all these other places in Scotland that have the technology and have the skills, where men and women are looking for work, that they get the jobs. And we certainly take action against any business that hires our workers to replace them with workers from abroad being exploited at £3 an hour. They're robbing our resource and they're exploiting workers from other lands, and it has to stop. That's why independence is about energy. Because this is our second bounty. I remember standing in this constituent, be active in the 70s. I was brought up just over the hills of Linlithgow. I remember in the 60s when oil was discovered and we were told it would be gone by the 1980s. By the time we got to the 1980s, it would be gone by the millennium. By the time we got to the referendum, well, it was going to be a liability. How could an independent Scotland cope with the costs of decommissioning and the fact that the oil was virtually all gone? Now that UK government can't extract it fast enough, despite the risks it's causing to the planet, we have to get some out, not necessarily all of it, but we have to get it out for our own people, and it should benefit us. But we've had that taken away from us, that huge resource. And so if you want an argument for independence, it's about energy. Not just getting what remains of our oil and gas so that people can run their cars, heat their homes, but it's getting the benefit of that offshore wind potential and indeed onshore wind potential. Because we have the opportunity, once again, as we should have been with oil and gas, to be up there with Norway, to be able to be properly the Saudi Arabia of wind that Boris Johnson talks about. We shouldn't be shivering in our homes. We shouldn't have kids unemployed or only in unskilled labour doing the gig economy. We should have skilled construction jobs. That comes about from getting control of our oil and gas. That comes about from getting control of our energy-hungry government that knows what it's doing and will stand up to the big corporations and actually do what their manifesto commitment was to establish a Scottish energy company. And that way, we end the absurdity and indeed the perversity that we are an energy-rich country and over half our people are going to be in fuel poverty. And of that percentage, a percentage will be in severe, critical fuel poverty. We got ripped off and exploited, and as the saying goes, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. We need independence because we can't allow oil and gas to go the same, offshore wind, onshore wind to go the same way as oil and gas. This is our resource, this is our future, and that's why we need independence.
I think this is our 41st wee Alba book meeting, and this little wee book was produced in March 2022. It's just 8 months old, and in its wee life, two things have happened. We of course produced this book on the basis that after multiple mandates we absolutely had to have a referendum on independence and put the question to people of Scotland, but we also had to have the answers to some of the questions they posed in 2014 and felt weren't answered, but also provide an updated case for independence. But since production of this book in March, we've had the promise of an independence referendum on the 19th of October 2023, and this week we've been told we're not having one anymore. Shows what a short period of time can mean in the history of Scotland. However, I'm now going to introduce somebody, of course, known to you, who didn't see it was a way forward at all and gladly didn't seek permission to hold our independence referendum in 2014 for anyone apart from you, the people of Scotland. And therefore I'd like you to welcome the person who gave us an independence referendum with just one mandate, Alex Salmond.
Kaz is quite right. This is the 41st meeting of the Wee Alba book in the last few months, and I have to say Tasmina has brilliantly chaired at least 39 of them, if my counting is correct. And obviously, I had the great pleasure of campaigning with Debbie Ewen last Saturday. We were campaigning in Broxburn and Winchborough. I was interested in Kenny talking about the buses in Shetland, incidentally. I mean, you can't get a bus in Winchborough for love nor money at the present moment, as Debbie and I were hearing last Saturday. And now we come to Uphall. You see, when Kenny and I were campaigning for independence back in the 1980s, we were told absolutely that we must argue for two things in that campaign: independence for Scotland and Home Rule for Uphall. And that's opposite this evening. Now, I'm going to come on to a wee bit of the content of the Wee Alba book in a minute or two. But look, this is one of the first public meetings in Scotland after his and her lordships in the Supreme Court decided to tell the people of Scotland that we're really a second-class nation. Just to give you a flavour of how ridiculous that judgment was, apparently if we were oppressed or under military occupation or a colony, then we'd have the right of having a self-determination referendum. But according to the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom, Scotland doesn't qualify for any of these things. And therefore, because we are a civic, developed community who go about things in a democratic way, apparently we have no right of self-determination. Well, I think Scotland will tell the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom and Lord Reid to use the West Lothian vernacular, where to go over the next few months. Where people obviously, and it's right and proper, I'm with a former Justice Secretary in Scotland, have a great feeling of respect for courts. But let me tell you a bit about the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom. The Supreme Court of the United Kingdom was a Tony Blair invention. Why did he invent the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom? Because he wanted to be American. If you remember Tony Blair, he wanted to be the American president. Unfortunately, he wasn't born in America, couldn't be the American president, so his idea was to ape American institutions and, of course, to invade countries with America wherever he could. That was Tony Blair's idea. And the Judicial Committee of the House of Lords, which is actually what the Supreme Court is, didn't sound cool Britannia enough for Tony Blair. So he invented the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom. And of course, initially, even up until a couple of years ago, you had judges on it who were judges like normally, who were people who were able to kick over the traces to see the justice in a case. And Lady Hale, the very able chair of that court, 2 years ago, kicked over Boris Johnson's traces in terms of an attempt to prorogue Parliament. But after that, of course, the Tory government and Mr Johnson in particular had a case in mind. He thought, well, why don't we get rid of these inconvenient judges and this inconvenient court? And since then, and over the last 2 years, and particularly under the chairmanship of Lord Reid, the Supreme Court has been giving every assurance that they'll do nothing to upset the apple cart. And every judge that's been appointed to the Supreme Court, and that is the vast majority of them in that timescale, has been somebody who has signed up for the British establishment. And no one more so than Lord Reid. Now, I've had political opponents all my days. I've liked some of them, I've not liked some of them quite as much. But I've had respect for an enormous number of people. The late Donald Dewar. I didn't agree with him on the future of Scotland. He was a devolutionist, I was a Scottish nationalist. But we worked together in the referendum to establish the Scottish Parliament. And what unified us in that referendum was not the pursuit of independence or the pursuit of devolution, was the single concept which he articulated with me through that referendum campaign, that the people of Scotland had the right to determine our own future regardless of what that future is. It was a choice for the people of Scotland, an essentially democratic choice, that Scotland was a bona fide nation and had the right of self-determination as enshrined in the United Nations Charter in 1960. We weren't a second-class nation, we weren't second-class citizens. If we chose to stay in the United Kingdom, it would be our choice. If we chose to leave it, it would be our choice. And that has been accepted for at least the last 50 years in politics. Even the greatest opponent of Scottish independence in our recent history, Margaret Thatcher, in her autobiography, The Downing Street Years, said, of course, Scots are an ancient, proud nation. If the Scots were to determine an independence, no English politician, certainly not myself, as she said, would gainsay that process. It's been an accepted argument for all of that time that Scotland had the right to choose, until this week the Supreme Court says, no, somehow Scotland, alone among nations, doesn't have that right. Well, it's bunkum and has to be responded to. The gauntlet has been flung down, and it's time for Scotland to pick it up. So what should be done? Well, the first thing to be done is the Scottish MPs and the MSPs, the vast majority of whom in both parliaments support independence, need to make a declaration of Scotland's fundamental rights. They need to follow Kenny MacAskill and Neil Hanvey in standing up for the country and making it absolutely clear that Scotland as a nation has the right to choose its own future. Secondly, we've got to embrace popular protest. I was delighted to see the response and demonstrations around Scotland on Wednesday night to the Supreme Court's decision. But hitherto, in the last year or two, many politicians in Scotland who should know a lot better have been looking down their noses at popular protest. You embrace popular protest. It's one of the great things about Scotland that we've got the ability to have popular demonstrations peacefully, respectfully, constitutionally, But people have to have the right to take part, to participate in the process. That's what shows you care about things. Whether you're a striking teacher or a campaigner for independence, it's part of the political process, and don't let anyone tell us otherwise. It's a historic right of people in a democracy to show their engagement with a campaign. Thirdly, we've got to have a political strategy. You know, I thought going to the Supreme Court was madness. Why did I think it was madness? Because anybody who's looked at the Supreme Court over the last 2 years know it's a political court, it's a conservative court. Why on earth would you bare Scotland's breast before the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom and expect, you know, it's like saying, I used to think there was 3 great lies in life, the last one of which was, I'm from the Treasury and I'm here to support Scotland. It's a bit like that with the Supreme Court. Did we really think the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom, and it's all, you know, the message is there, the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom was going to assist the Scottish Government in dismantling the United Kingdom. The Supreme Court's in the same category as the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, who regards it as its duty and mission to defend Britain. The Supreme Court regards it as its duty and mission to defend the United Kingdom. So I thought it was daft to go there. And if the Supreme Court had contained itself and just set about shredding the case of the Scottish Government, which was presented by the Lord Advocate in a pretty unenthusiastic way. I don't blame her, incidentally. She clearly didn't believe in the case. Then if they just contained themselves by doing that, they probably would have got away with it. But Lord Reid couldn't contain himself. He wanted to put the boot in. And that's what he did in the judicial terms, and he's gone far too far. The Scottish opinion on independence is split 50-50. I've been looking at the last 68 polls, no, 76 polls actually. 30 are for independence, 38 are against, and 8 are dead heats. So let's say it's 50-50. But if you asked another question of people in Scotland, do you think that Scotland should have the right to decide its future or not? Now, it's not a 50-50 split. It's an 80-20 split, perhaps even more. Because every one of us here will know people who don't believe in independence, but they believe in Scotland. And whatever their political views, they're not going to have anybody telling them that Scotland is somehow a second-rate nation. It's just not acceptable. And that's exactly why the Lord Reid, by overstretching his hand, has created a political opportunity for Scotland. As I said, the gauntlet has to be picked up. Now, Alba's having a special National Assembly 2 weeks tomorrow, 2 weeks on Saturday in Perth, and we'll be presenting a plan led by MacAskill and Neil Hanvey in terms of what we think should be done, detailed plan as to how we should respond to the Supreme Court's position, how we should mobilise Scotland's elected representatives, how we should use our parliamentary strength in the Scottish Parliament, where there's an independence majority, and in the Westminster Parliament, where for the first time in history, first time since the Irish Parliamentary Party in the 19th century, there are almost 50 nationalist MPs. Now, a few months back, Kenny MacAskill and Neil Hanvey gave the Speaker of the House of Commons near apoplexy. I mean, I was seriously worried about that man. I mean, he was really upset. Because as Boris Johnson was departing, Kenny and Neil wanted to tell him a few things before he left about his attitude to Scotland, and the Speaker was really, really upset. The poor man. And that was one day, one incident. So proceedings get interrupted for a day, and then things go back to normal. Let's see what's happening every day. Every single day, till Scotland's rights are respected. And let's say it wasn't just interventions on the Prime Minister, it was using parliamentary procedures. Let's play Parnell with the Westminster Parliament. Let's bring home to them, to the centre of power, what it feels like to be helpless in the face of an overweening force. Use the parliamentary strength that the people have given, as opposed to sitting down and just accepting any nonsense that's dished out to our country. Back, Tasmina was said that I only required one mandate as First Minister to deliver a referendum, and that's true. I've got a secret for you. David Cameron wasn't an enthusiast to have a Scottish referendum. You know, that wasn't his plan. It wasn't a good idea as far as he was concerned, and of course, as we know from his autobiography, in the last week he was phoning everybody because he thought he was about to lose Scotland. You know, he phoned Barack Obama, he phoned Angela Merkel, he phoned Vladimir Putin, he phoned the late Her Majesty the Queen, desperate to get any help he could to stop the Scots leaving and him being humiliated as Prime Minister. So it wasn't his idea to have a referendum. He had to be persuaded politically it was the least worst option. That if he wasn't going to have it, then the Scottish Parliament would have it. That there would be a reaction in Scotland to the denial of democracy. In the period since the Second World War, 50 countries have become independent from Westminster. In my time as in the House of Commons, 25 years, and my time as First Minister, I certainly met the High Commissioner from every single one of these nations. Large, small, rich, poor, some with great potential, some with great problems. You know the one thing that unified all of these countries, every single one of them, not one of these High Commissioners said to me, Mr. Salmond, we're anxious to come back under London control. Not one of them. And every single one of them, in order to obtain their independence, had certain challenges to meet. And every single one of them, at various stages in obtaining that independence, had a recalcitrant, unwilling Westminster government. That's why you're not going to be given or handed out Scotland's independence. Independence has to be won, it has to be taken. We've chosen rightly as a nation to win it on the field of politics. We go about our business in a peaceful, constitutional, politically active way. That should continue and must continue. But our observance to peaceful action shouldn't be mistaken for weakness. And Scotland should never accept being told by anyone, from Rishi Sunak downwards, I was going to say, but maybe it should be from Rishi Sunak upwards, that Scotland is anything other than a bona fide, first-class nation, equal with any other nation in this planet, and with the same rights and abilities as any other nation on this planet. Now, Kenny MacAskill, and he's doing a superb job, is trying to illustrate to folk in Scotland the huge potential there is from our energy resources. You know, this is a country which has been endowed, blessed with energy resources coming out for years. We can look across the North Sea and see what Norway did with approximately the same resource. They're now sitting on $1 trillion Norwegian pension fund with the returns from that pension fund many times their oil revenue. We've got Rishi Sunak gambling that the next 5 years he'll get an extra 80,000 million. That's £16,000 a head for every person in this hall tonight over the next 5 years in order to desperately try to get the UK out of hock. So we've been endowed with some tremendous opportunities. But you know, I'm fed up with hearing people tell me that, look, if only we'd decided on independence in the 1970s. If only we'd done it in the 1980s. The chance is gone, because the chance is not gone. The second opportunity is here and it's coming. And I would say that a country which produces right now 5 times as much gas as it consumes should be benefiting, not suffering from an energy crisis. And furthermore, a country which can produce, in terms of cheap, green, affordable power, 5 times its electricity consumption from consented fields that we know of in offshore Scotland, should be able to make sure that every single family can afford to heat their home with clean, green power. So I started tonight by saying that Lord Reid had told us that only countries which were suffering privation would be entitled to self-determination. And I'm not describing, I never have described Scotland as a colony. But I'll tell you what, every one of us knows Scottish families are going to suffer privation this winter. Not to be able to have the common decencies of life, like heating your home, is not acceptable. But even more unacceptable is being told you don't have the democratic ability to do something about it. So I'm hoping that by their arrogance, by their overreach, and the establishments through history demonstrate both overreach and arrogance. That's how political change happens. There's a spark being lit in the Supreme Court, unintentionally, but lit nonetheless, which is going to take this country to look at itself, to look at its own self-respect, to look at the privation of Scottish families this winter and say it's high time we claim back our own natural resources and high time we claim back our own country. Thank you very much.
Very much indeed. It's now time for questions, and I said Denise Finlay is so we must finish at 9:30. It gives me an opportunity to thank Indie Live for coming to film this event and bring it to people across the country. Can I say Indie Live have not stopped campaigning for independence since 2014, and I'd like you all to join me in thanking them for all their work. So far I've only got one question from Colin, I think, McCain, wishes his name to be read out. Now, read out the question. Please don't be shy, you certainly don't have a reputation for shy types this way, and either write your question or we'll pass the mic round and you can ask out. So, Colin's question, how do we get indie groups and parties to work together? I'm quite active on social media. If Alba is mentioned, I'm either a blank or a blank, and I'm not going to say what those words are. However, really important question, and it was heartwarming, I think Alex mentioned it in his opening remarks, to see various parties sharing a platform outside the Scottish Parliament. Well, I think the Scottish Greens didn't participate in the rally outside Holyrood, but it is, of course, very important. So, Kenny, I'll come to you first. How do indie groups and parties work together?
Well, I think the juncture has now been met where we have to take control of the Yes movement away from the leadership of a particular party or indeed the Scottish Government. The grassroots have to take control. Now, I think that has to incorporate all political parties who support independence. It has to include all Yes groups, and it has to include those who are in no party at all. But I think we have to go forward. You can't dragoon people. If some people are sectarian and refuse to cooperate, there's nothing I can do about that. But I think on behalf of Alba, I can say we are happy to work with anyone. I know that sometimes that can even afflict Yes groups, but I have to say I was speaking last night at Yes Eyemouth, as I've spoken at Yes Borders, and people are happy, up for it, wanting to do it. So I think it's back to the grassroots having control and all of us going forward. And equally, if some people want to sit in the sidelines, then there's nothing I can do about that, but the rest of us just get on with it.
Well, I'm going to say that there were impressive demonstrations around the capital cities of Europe last Wednesday night. There was Edinburgh, Dublin, Berlin, and Brussels. But there was also a demonstration in Inverurie. And I spoke at the Inverurie demonstration, which approximately, when I recognised the political activists in the demonstration, half of them were from the SNP and half of them were from Alba. And everybody was happy together at that demonstration Wednesday night, thanks to Geary Women for Change. Incidentally, somebody phoned me up and said, "What's this Garriott Women for Change?" And I said, "Are you local?" So Geary Women for Change organised the demonstration, perhaps an illustration of what Kenny had to say. Look, what Alba will be doing is bringing forward a range of ideas over the next 2 weeks as to how Scotland should respond to what is a political emergency. Now, that's not just an Alba response, it's a Scottish response. And everybody who believes in the cause will get their shoulders to the wheel and take action to make sure that Scotland is not left in political limbo ad infinitum. Now, I happen to think Alba is essential for action in Scotland now. If there had been action, then Alba wouldn't have been formed. And therefore, Alba's success in one way or another is going to be really, really important. But any trace of Alba's success will keep everybody else on their toes. And I can only speak for Alba, and we'll cooperate with anyone who's pushing forward their shoulder to the wheel of independence. And if it comes to a de facto election, then of course, in the spirit of the question, we should stand as Scotland United. SNP, Scotland United for Independence. Greens, Scotland United for Independence. Alba, Scotland United for Independence. Because if you're fighting a one-issue election, you need to have one candidate in each constituency.
I was going to ask you to remain standing, but the clap interrupted me because the next question from Robert Ashton, two questions. How many mandates do we need? And the second question, what do we do with the hardcore unionists? Alex.
Well, it's a range of options for the second part of that question, of course. But how many mandates? You only need one man. I mean, what you just have to do is to work out. I mean, I had some advantages as First Minister. I mean, I'd been in Westminster for 25 years. I mean, therefore, you know how they think. You know exactly. I mean, understanding your opponents is hugely important in politics, because then you can anticipate their moves. But you should only have one mandate. You have to put your ducks in a row to mobilise the strengths that you have. You shouldn't fight on opposing ground. You know, the problem with going to the Supreme Court is that it's like you want to play every match away from home. I mean, it's a daft thing to do. You fight on your own ground, where you've got the support among the people that you embrace people, because the people of Scotland, by and large, certainly the activists, are on your side. The Scottish Parliament, where you have a majority, that's where you take your initiatives. You don't play every match away from home. So one mandate is enough. What do we do with the unionists and us? We treat people with respect. You treat them with respect, and you try publications like the Alba book to bring people on side. I had a meeting earlier on, which overran a bit, I'm sorry, but that was from somebody who 10 years ago was a convinced unionist and is now of a different persuasion. It's pro-independence. That's an example of people can change their minds, and you have to approach people in a proper way. But you see, I don't think Scotland's problem, I never have actually, lies with Westminster. I mean, certainly the policies of Westminster, certainly the activities of Westminster. The problem issue is with Scots. Cunningham Graham, who was a founder of the Independent Labour Party, an ILP MP, and then founder of the Scottish National Party, he said, Cunningham Graham once said, the problem with Scotland is not the English, who are a great and noble people. The problem for Scotland is those Scots who are born without imagination. And what we've got to say to our fellow country people is civilly explain the arguments, because my guess is if you convince people, particularly on the economics, particularly on issues like energy, then you won't have any trouble getting a majority for independence. And what you have to meet Westminster with is political strength. What they'll understand and respect is political strength. You don't go pleading, you don't go cap in hand, you demonstrate political strength. And then you'll find that they'll fold like a pack of cards, as indeed they folded in the past.
Then, of course, as a Westminster parliamentarian, you spend a lot of your time with hardcore unionists. But I suppose, just following in from the question is, how do we deal with them? And perhaps it means in referendum terms or in terms of negotiating, I'm not entirely sure. But following on from Alex's earlier point about if you were to ask people, even unionists, whether Scotland should have the right to determine its own future, surely the majority would say yes. Is that your experience of Westminster Tories?
My experience of Westminster is twofold. I mean, first of all, I have to say, I think there's a growing acceptance and indeed desire amongst many in England for independence. I have to say, I remember going down after 2014, and many I met who you'd describe would probably be Labour voters to the left, all basically said, we know how upset you will be, Kenny, but we have to say we're quite happy. They're now actually very keen for independence to happen as soon as possible, because they see it as required, they see it as a right, but they also see it as something that can benefit them because it will change the system. In terms of Tories, I think you have a split between those who frankly don't care, and indeed quite often quite contemptuous of Scotland, and perhaps a smaller amount who recognise the great resource that Scotland and the damage that would be to their economy. Never mind those at the senior level that don't want the responsibility for being the Prime Minister or the government that saw the United And I think, the likes of David Davis, or, unionist, he will say he doesn't support independence, but he certainly would support democratic rights. So I think the hardcore unionists are diminishing. The support for independence is increasing, and it's simply those with a vested interest that are playing a game that is devious.
Interesting question from Willie Cruikshank. Of course, the First Minister has promised now a plebiscite election referring to the next UK general election. But Willie asked the question I've also been asking, which is, could we hold a Scottish election, which of course would enable, as he correctly states, 16 and 17-year-olds to vote, and of course indeed European nationals. There's been some discussion about that in media and amongst political circles over the past couple of days. What are your views? Kenny, will I come to you first?
I take the view, yes, it's possible it should be looked at. I think it would be difficult, just the numbers. You'd have to get the Greens on board, and I fear that perhaps they've become a wee bit comfortable in ministerial office, but certainly there seems to be some suggestion it would have been a lot easier had we had a supermajority in 2021. But certainly, all I can also say is proceeding for a Scottish election is so much better. It's not just simply 16 and 17-year-olds, it's EU nationals, and indeed the big problem, as I was speaking to a friend having a cup of coffee, wait till the Westminster election, because the rules are coming in that you need photo ID. There's going to be many people in Scotland are going to turn up and are not going to be able to vote because they will not have a driver's licence, they will not have a passport, they will not have downloaded the application form that you require to submit. That will be quite complicated, and we wait and see whether a Scottish bus pass will suffice, but I would imagine the Tories will go out of their way to try and ensure that that doesn't happen. So picking the right battleground is absolutely essential, and certainly the Supreme Court wasn't. So the Scottish election is one way of doing it, but it's not simple.
Alba.
Kenny says is right. Particularly, it would be a lot simpler if we'd had the supermajority that some of us were calling for last year. You can do it. If the Greens were in board, you can. I mean, technically you can. You don't need 2/3 of the Parliament to force an election, because every time the First Minister resigned, then somebody else is put up for First Minister. But when it comes down to one candidate, you can vote against them. And if you can't get a First Minister within 30 days, then an election follows. So technically, according to the rules, if the SNP wanted to collapse the Parliament and force an election on the issue of Scottish independence and the right of Scottish people to have independence, then they could do it. I mean, I've got the feeling just now, and hopefully this will dissipate over the next few weeks, that the Westminster contingent of the SNP seem not as enthusiastic as they might be about the idea of a plebiscite election at Westminster. The MSPs seem quite enthusiastic about that. And the Westminster MPs seem quite enthused about a plebiscite election in the Scottish Parliament. It's strange that, But look, instead of being worried about it, you should embrace it. If it comes to that, if that's the only show in town, then go into it wholeheartedly. The one thing I would say, if you do end up at a plebiscite election and Alba will put our shoulders to the wheel, then it has to be an election to decide independence. Can it be an election just to have yet another mandate, to try and pressurise yet another referendum? I mean, I think Westminster has telegraphed their opinion on that via Lord Reid. It can't be that. It has to be a decision. Now, there's countries around this world who've become independent not from referendum, but from elections. Most recently in Europe, Slovakia and the Czech Republic. They had an election. They voted different ways. They shook hands and decided it's time to set up two countries. The Velvet Divorce of 1991, I think it was. So it can happen. There's many countries have become independent after an electoral test. You don't have to have a referendum. A referendum has great advantages, but that's the reason I chose it as a route. But you don't have to have it. A democratic test. Now, Kenny makes a very strong point. We've got to understand that nothing stands still in politics. And the Tories, who are looking at a disaster at the present moment, are desperate to get this ID legislation through, because they know the only people who will be disqualified are people who are not going to vote Tory. I mean, this is a habit of the Conservative Party through the ages. They want to organise, I mean, firstly, they used to have a franchise where there was only about 4 folk voting in every constituency. And then as the franchise gradually spread, they've always been thinking of ways to get back to these happy days of rotten boroughs. Now, they're trying to exclude people from voting on the basis of ID, and because they acknowledge that the people who turn up without ID would not be natural Tory voters. That's going to bias the case. The 16 and 17-year-olds, the European nationals. So there are many attractions. And if you're going down the route of a de facto referendum, then the Scottish Parliament would be a better place for it, a Scottish parliamentary election. But the one criteria that Alba would say for participating and enthusiastically taking part in that campaign is it has to be agreed and understood that that is the point of decision. Not just a de facto referendum, but a real decision on independence.
I've got a question from David. David Henry, would you like to ask it yourself? We have a mic coming to you.
Thank you. The ruling on Wednesday has been discussed by SSRG, and there's a thing online with a retired lawyer. He makes an important point. The third point that they refer to is that Scotland, in fact all countries, should have access to meaningful access to government to pursue our political, social and cultural development. How do we do that if we've only got 59 MPs in Westminster?
Okay, did you
Yeah,
hear
I
that?
know it.
Alex?
The phrase is taken directly from the UN resolution of 1960. That's where that phrase comes from. And this idea that the Supreme Court, that you have to be a colony before you've got the right to assert self-determination, this is nonsensical. I mean, if you think about it, it means that if you are, like Scotland, a country which had 1,000 years of history as an independent nation, which went into a voluntary union with its larger neighbour, where it's been accepted from certainly the best part of this century, that union could be discontinued by the votes of the people of Scotland. Somehow we don't get self-determination until we can persuade the English to occupy us. I mean, it's a ludicrous position and not supported by the United Nations or the international authorities. It's only supported by a court which is currying up to the powers that are at Westminster. It's a peculiar view of life politics, and it would be laughed at in terms of international arena. But, you know, that's what the court has said. The real issue is going to be the Scottish response. If we lie down and accept that, right, we don't have this right, we don't have that right, then we'll be rolled over for the foreseeable future. I don't think we will. No more than, if anybody accepts a diminution of their rights, then these rights disappear, whether you're a trade unionist or whether you're a nation. The question is, what do you do to respond? And that's going to be the issue. And that's what Alba, we've already got the framework of our response worked out, and then we'll be articulating it in 2 weeks' time. And then if people agree with it, hopefully they'll come to that banner and we'll discuss with them and come to... I don't want two things. One, you can't wait till next year. I mean, this is immediate. What people in Scotland want to know, are we going to take this lying down or are we going to do something about it? Well, I'm on the something about it side. And I think most people in Scotland are there as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Alex. A question from a different David. How come no one has reminded Rishi Sunak about his comments in 2017, saying Scotland can have a referendum in 7 years post-Brexit, as it could really come back to bite him? Ken, why have you not asked him yet? That's what David Hugh is saying.
David brought that to my attention, it kind of passed my mind, and also the shuffling of chairs between Johnson to Truss and now to Sunak has all come so quickly, so we'll bear that in mind and see what we can do. No, Sunak's just slippery as an eel, equally he's got his problems trying to keep his rabid right-wingers in check, and I don't think he'll manage, but I'm sure Neil and I will manage to ask him that, and we'll get some hypocritical reply.
Now, this is a question from Maureen Hollingsworth. Would you like to ask it yourself? No, I'll ask it. I know the big question is independence, yes, but other questions matter. But how can we get the new bus service to work? Sorry. How can we get the new bus service to work for the people of West Lothian? Mr. MacAskill or Debbie?
So that's a very good question, Maureen, and that's something I've been working very, very hard on during this campaign. I've been talking to lots of people who are very unhappy about the bus service since it's been taken over by McGill's. So just this week, I actually wrote to McGill's and asked them if I'm elected as councillor in this ward. I asked them for an immediate meeting. To my surprise, they've actually already answered me and have agreed to a meeting with me. They are very, very happy to meet with me to discuss constructive ways forward. They also want to see how they can engage with us to look at recruiting more drivers, because there is a big shortage of drivers. And they've also come up with some very, very constructive ideas about how we can work with them to try and improve the bus service and make sure that it actually meets the needs of the people of West Lothian.
I just want to say something about Debbie, and I'll pass it to Alex. That's a perfect example of why Debbie is such a good candidate. Is that even before election, you are off on the front foot trying to secure meetings to help your community. And I wish you absolutely every success, because these are the type of politicians we need in local chambers across the country to make a difference to real life issues that affect people on a daily basis. So thank you very much indeed, Debbie. Now, Alex, you have a keen interest in the buses.
I do, and the reason is this. I was with Debbie last Saturday, canvassing in the Rose at Winnsboro, and this lady told us how she'd lost 2 hours of her pay. She worked in Newbridge because she couldn't get on the bus because it was packed out, and therefore was 2 hours late for work. Got her paid off 2 hours, which in current circumstances is appalling for everyone. Anyway, we finished hearing this sad tale, and at the tip of my tongue was about to say to Debbie, "You better write to McGill's," and Debbie looked at me and said, "I'm writing to McGill's." Before I could say anything, I thought to myself, that's the woman I would have as my councillor.
Now, I have no more written questions in, so it's now down to a mic around the audience. I know you have plenty to say, looking at some of your gestures and applause and appreciation of some of the comments we've heard this evening. So who would like to go first? Oh, you all look behind you. Any questions from the audience yet? Right, while you're thinking about it, looking at all the men in the front row just passing it back to people behind you. I can see you, I'll come back to you in a second. This event, of course, has been overtaken by this week's events. But I wonder if we could just touch on one topic in the wee Alba book, and then I'll take the question from the floor there. Because, of course, in the lead up to this, there's been a number of Scottish Government papers published relative to a number of issues. One important one is, of course, once we do come into the campaign trail, when we know actually when we're having the referendum, is about Scotland's relationship with Europe. And it's one, of course, that's articulated and discussed well in the wee Alba book, a position that we think will win on the doorstep when people are looking for confirmed positions, things that they can believe in and solid propositions. Alex, could you elaborate further on how you envisage Scotland's relationship with Europe?
It's a great topic, because this book was composed on the belief that we would soon need to have a platform for independence that would withstand a referendum campaign, a platform which would be a boost for the yes side, to show that we've been thinking over the last 8 years about the key questions, because the world of 2022 is not the world of 2014. Huge things have happened. There's been a pandemic, there's the war in Europe, there's the energy crisis, the cost of living crisis, all these huge things have happened. And of course, one of the things that's happened is Brexit. You know, despite Ian Blackford many times telling the House of Commons that Scotland wouldn't stand for it, apparently they did stand for it, and Brexit has happened. And just as I thought it wasn't a great idea to go to the Supreme Court, I honestly, despite the fact, I've been a passionate pro-European for many, many years, the ability of Scotland to tell England to change its mind, it was always going to be, we've got to understand, we're 5.5 million people, there's 60 million plus in England. Scotland, there's been a conceit of Scottish politicians through the ages. If only they elect us, then we'll show the English what they should be doing. Actually, what usually happens is the English votes them out of office. And the idea that Scotland could tell England, regardless of what we thought about it, regardless of what our view was, that they shouldn't have done that and they should reverse their opinion, was always to me, a long shot. And similarly, we've got to adjust our ideas to what has happened. It is a reality. And, some people in the national movement, and, understandably, because they're very attached to the European Union, think, oh, well, we can just say we'll be in the European Union. And that's fine, except it takes 5 years to join the European Union. Even a friendly joining of the European Union, and Scotland would be treated as a friend, it's a 5-year process. So I want you to think about, you're in a process just now, where Rishi Sunak or his successor, if it's another month or two before the referendum, and probably another 3 Prime Ministers down the road, and you're sitting as the Scottish First Minister, negotiating with whoever's the Prime Minister, let's say in October the 20th next year, okay? You start negotiations, and one of the first things that will come up is, what's your trading policy going to be? You'll say, well, we're going to join the European Union. They'll say, yeah, that's 5 years' time. What's it going to be after we sign the independence agreement? But you cannot put yourself in that position. So either you say, oh, well, the game's a bogey, let's all go home, nothing we can do, oh dear, what a problem. Or alternatively, luckily for us, there's an alternative. And that alternative is called the European Free Trade Association, EFTA. EFTA is 4 countries, Norway, Iceland, Switzerland and Liechtenstein. And EFTA, EFTA can't be a bad place to be because all 4 of these countries are in the top 10 per head of wealth in the world. It doesn't mean if you're in EFTA, you automatically get into the top 10, but it tells you it's not a bad place to be. And EFTA have got trading agreements with the European Union, with the European single market, and with trading arrangements around the world, including the UK. But the biggest advantage of EFTA for Scotland is it doesn't take 5 years to join EFTA. It takes 3 months. And I know, because I've spoken to each of the countries in EFTA, and I've spoken to the EFTA Secretariat, that Scotland would get a warm, willing reception in EFTA. They'd be very keen on having Scotland. It's ideal, because Scotland is 5.5 million people, wouldn't be dominating the other 4 countries, the biggest of which just now is Norway. So Scotland is an ideal fit for EFTA, and would get a very friendly reception. But above all, it's a question of speed. And once you're in EFTA, you've effectively solved the economics of trade. You'll be entitled to join all of EFTA's pre-existing trade treaties. You'll be entitled to apply for the European single market through EFTA. And that means you can sit down in these negotiations in October the 20th of next year, look the UK Prime Minister, whoever that may be, in the eye and say, yeah, we're joining EFTA. And therefore you've solved the economics. Now in the future you might take a different view in the European Union. You might want to join at some point in the future if the people of Scotland do. But right now, EFTA should be the answer. That's what's articulated in the wee Alba book. Now, there's another argument as well. Scotland voted overwhelmingly to stay in the European Union, by almost 2 to 1. But there's still a third of Scots who voted against it. And you don't want to say to them, look, independence is only for the Euro enthusiasts. Because if you ask the question of Scotland, how many of you want to be in the European Free Trade Association, that was aligned with Europe, part of the single market, with all the advantages that that has, again, it wouldn't be 2/3, it'd be 95% who'd regard that as sensible. So you're doing, in terms of getting to independence, something that's accepted by the vast majority of the Scottish population, and something which, crucially, you can genuinely get delivered in the course of negotiations, so you're not negotiating from limbo. That's the value of having something like the Wee Alba Port.
And I have another question from the floor. Appeal to the Ken.
I would have to be more specialist views than me. I think you would be better approaching from a government. That seems to be the direct way in, and that's why we have a government in Scotland that gives legitimacy. There might be other ways in, but the common, sensible way would be in through government. I think that would stand most chance of success. Obviously, United Nations will speak to organisations that are unrepresented, because issues exist for countries and organisations and groups of people, but that's why we have a government in Scotland, and that's why the government in Scotland should be doing far more than simply saying, oh dear, we'll reflect upon it.
Kenny's correct. The Scottish Government would have huge advantages, because you have to have standing, right, in terms of getting into international courts, whether it's the International Court of Justice or the United Nations. I mean, a few months back I was doing a speech in Catalonia. I did some more research than I previously knew about Catalonian history. And I came across an appeal that Catalonia made to the United Nations in 1945. And it was a brilliant document. I was reading the translation incidentally, but it was still a hugely eloquent document. It reminded me actually of some of the best lines in the Declaration of Arbroath. It was brilliantly written and presented. And Catalonia in 1945, the UN was just being formed, and Catalonia was trying to get to a situation where people would regard the war against fascism as unfinished and would finish off Franco. Unfortunately for the Catalonian case, things developed in the Cold War, and that wasn't the direction that international politics put. But the key point that Catalonia had even back then was they had to be a legitimate representative body. Now, the Scottish Government has many of the characteristics of getting to international courts. So I would say the Scottish Government has to lead in going to the United Nations, going to the ICJ, because it's only they who will be recognised. Now, that doesn't mean if other folk have different ideas, they shouldn't do it, produce the documents. It's all good. You know, the more, the better. I mean, I remember John McGill in the Scotland UN Committee, many years ago, had this concept. The one thing I would say to people was this, folk. Yes, we have many friends internationally, and Alba International is a particularly active internationally in recruiting as many more as possible. I'll be making a speech in Rennes next week, the week after next. You know, we got a huge response to a speech I made in the Pyrenees this summer, and you know, we've got so many friends and people of influence who are in Scotland's corner internationally. And their efforts and their help and the lobbying internationally of huge importance. And all these people are furious that Scotland has been denied its rights as a nation. But ultimately, helpful though that will be, to take our case to the international courts for the Scottish Government to do that, this issue is going to be decided here. Nobody's going to do it for us ultimately. It has to be decided here. One thing from Scottish history. In the 6th of April 1320, the barons and nobles, written by the prelates, but representing the whole community of the realm, wrote a letter to Pope John in Avignon. And they appealed, we all know the Declaration of Arbroath, it resonates through history. It's probably the first declaration of popular sovereignty in history. Because they said Robert Bruce was a great king, good King Robert, our hero king, but if he ever gives in and doesn't defend us against the English, we'll get rid of him and we'll get somebody else. You know, that is absolutely the declaration, and more brilliant though it is. But that declaration was written from a position, and the first thing they said was, look, Scotland is back under Scottish control. We have achieved this, and now we're looking for international support, acknowledgement of our rights as a nation. And the same lesson is evident today. We've got to do the job democratically here in Scotland, and then we'll find so many friends across every corner of this planet.
Thank you. Another question from the back? Could you stand up, sir, if possible? Perfect.
Yes, I do, and I think we have to do it very quickly now. The one thing I say, the bit about Europe, the world has changed since 2014. Back in 2014, you could envisage a position where Scotland and England were partners within the European Union, right? With the same trading area, economies moving roughly in the same direction, and therefore it made great sense to share a currency. Great sense to share a currency. But that's no longer the position. As we've seen over the last few weeks, as I said to one of the interviewers recently, when he said, "Are you going to stay in sterling?" And I said, "Well, why should we? Nobody else is staying in sterling. Why should we stay in it?" So, sterling is what they used to call a banana currency. There's no stability. There's no stability of trade. I saw one of the other commentators said, and it's a phrase we should think about, that this is the first time in history, in terms of the Brexit vote, that one country has imposed economic sanctions on another country. And that's what happened, the Brexit vote. You're quite right. We've had economic sanctions imposed on us by the Brexit vote. So now the two economies are going to diverge, and we've got to decide whether we want to be part of a single market of 500 million people, or whether we want to continue on the downward slide with a banana currency. And if we decide, as we should, to be part of that larger market, incidentally, one of the reasons why the Northern Irish economy has been outperforming the UK for the first time in recorded economic statistics, because it's part of that single market, then of course it would be far better to have our own currency. And if you've got your own currency, you've got to do it quickly. You've got to say, it's a bit like Gordon Brown and his tests for the Euro. Tony Blair wanted to join the Euro, Gordon Brown didn't. Gordon Brown was Chancellor and said, I can't make him anywhere. I think it was 5 or 6 economic tests. And the last test was, we're no doing it until Gordon Brown says it. So it's a really bad idea to have these economic tests. If you're going for your own currency, you should establish it as quickly as possible. Now, it should be said, as the House of Darling had to admit during the BBC debate, that nobody can stop people in Scotland using sterling. Sterling's an internationally tradable currency. If you want to keep your pension in sterling, or your house in sterling, or your assets in sterling, or use sterling, nobody can stop you. That's not the issue, as he had to admit. The issue is, should you have your own currency? And the balance of advantage now, given the reality of 2022 and beyond, is yes, and we should have it as quickly as possible, because we'll have more room for economic manoeuvre in that wider single market.
Tell us who you are, Robert.
As long as you know women, that's fine. Listen, it's not often I like something that Angus Robertson said, but he said after that, the court judgment, that they would fight the next plebiscite election at Scotland United. I just want to ask the panel, how do you think the people of Scotland will react if it ends up another mandate for the SNP just to hold a referendum, which has been muted today?
Kenny.
Well, plebiscite elections will only work on the basis of a Scotland United front. I've always been in support supporter of that. They've even considered it before for Westminster elections. It seems to me that, Bloc Québécois is how they operate in Canada. It does remarkably well. It's not as yet managed to tip it for sovereignty in Quebec, but it does persuade people that they're better to be represented by Bloc Québécois, which isn't simply Parti Québécois. There is people who are not in Parti Québécois and in other political parties, and that's the direction forward. At one stage they even became the official opposition, I think, in the federal parliament in Ottawa. So the only possibility for Scotland to be successful in a plebiscite election is on Scotland United. To have 3-4 more independence parties is simply to cut our throat, even if you're taking the view that it's votes not seats. You have to galvanise it, you have to focus it, and to do that you make sure that the issue is about the Constitution, and you do it on a united front.
Minister was asked if Alba and the votes would count, and she said she would have to defer to MEC and deal with that next year, but Angus Robertson on the same day said that they would, which shows a lack of consistency or discussion or consultation even amongst the Scottish Government at the moment, at a time where we need to have a clear plan to move forward for the people of Scotland. It doesn't bode particularly well. But on that point, you don't have to have a question. It'd be really interesting for indeed Debbie as a local candidate, and for Kenny and Alex as they formulate a response to the Supreme Court judgment and how Scotland moves forward, to hear what your thoughts and feelings are about what's happened this week. Any comments? Are you feeling independence is closer, further away, more confident, less confident? Yes? David, you want to say something? It was, earlier in this week, it was clearly stated across all of the demonstrations that happened across Scotland, and indeed Europe and beyond, that very much this has to be about the people of Scotland. And we want to hear what the people of Scotland have to say.
Well, isn't it? On Wednesday, when I woke up and watched that being presented live, I didn't think very much. I thought it exposed effectively that Nicola Sturgeon's great plan had blown up in her face. But then later on in the day, I started to feel more and more angry that all these years, and I've not been campaigning for independence as long as Alex or many of the folk in this room, the last 7 or 8 years, I felt like I had wasted all my time, that we got absolutely nowhere. And I think she's done us a favour by accident. I don't think I want to hear anything else ever again about a referendum. I don't believe that's how we're going to deliver independence. I believe the energy crisis is real. I believe it's destroying people's lives. And the idea that even the fact that we're sitting here having meetings and trying to come up with a plan, it's obvious that the SNP has betrayed us. That's what I feel.
Okay. Anybody else? There's a number perhaps from the audience here. Anyone else wishing to share their views, thoughts?
I just feel as though we're being pushed like a Catalonia ball now.
I'm just going to pass you the mic because everyone would like to hear what you have to say. There we go. Thank you.
I just feel as though we're in a Catalonia ball now, that anything we try and do that isn't with Westminster is going to go against the grain and not look good. So play the real white book.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any other comments? Yes. Two more. So the gentleman with his hand at the back and the gentleman in the second row there. Thanks, Denise. Yes, sir. Okay.
just to add on what the yourself was saying to David. So I work in the financial service industry, and ever since Brexit, the ones that were not necessarily law would make their local feelings of what side they were on. You can see there's a sense of kind of, I'm siding with the EU rather than sticking with Westminster from this, without having to say something. I think before the vote in 2014, we did get to the side where one was right, one was wrong, no one could change. I think that vote overnight changed. And when I saw the result on Wednesday, I was actually in Bucharest during the week, and we talked about it a couple of nights before, and some very staunch people on that I'd be away with would be changing their mind. As soon as I saw the result, I was expecting a lot. We came back on Wednesday, not a word, because I don't think that's something you can stick behind. I think you'll have other people coming in that way as well. It's just the kind of feeling I've seen so far.
Thank you. Any more comments? I'm going to pass to the panel for any thoughts on what we've heard. Yes. Mike's coming to you, sir.
This magical or elusive Section 30, am I right in saying that's part of the Scotland Act that was written up by the Labour Party back in the 90s, which then became a law? So we would say, well, that's a bad law. It's obviously not doing what we wanted to do. And there's plenty of other laws that have been in all various shapes, which people then decide, well, that's a bad law. So is it possible that the Scotland Act could be rewritten without this need for Section 30?
Okay, thank you. I think, Alice, could we start? Thank you very much for your comments, and please raise your hand if you'd like to add to the discussion. The Section 30 point is an important one because it seems to have been abandoned this week, when in fact it was a surefire way that you managed to secure a referendum for us after just one mandate. I wonder if I can ask you to respond to that question and elaborate further as to what should be happening in relation to trying to secure a Section 30 mandate.
Well, as I said earlier, David Cameron wasn't initially a willing participant. We had to find a means, and you only get from Westminster when you have political pressure. The idea that in 2011, if you remember, the SNP won a majority of the seats in a proportional parliament. Nobody ever expected that to happen, but it happened in 2011. But the idea that the immediate response of the Prime Minister was to say, well done, Alec, congratulations. How can we arrange the referendum? That's not how it works. Obviously we had the political initiative, and then you have to drive that home. The most important thing about political initiatives is you have to have what you're going to do if they say no. Right? And that's what I lined up to present David Cameron with a series of alternatives which were more unpalatable than agreeing to the Section 30. Like the Scottish Parliament doing it ourselves, having our own referendum. And if you're not convinced that you could have survived a legal challenge, then you ask a question that will survive a legal challenge. And that's what I had lined up. Cameron also thought I was going to have a freeway referendum. And how do you make people believe that? Well, that's part of the statecraft of politics. But the most important thing you had at your back was that people believed they had voted for something and were determined to get it. Now, folks say we've wasted 8 years, and I think we have by and large, and certainly since Brexit. I mean, I've never seen, there's never been a concerted campaign over that entire time to force the UK Prime Minister to concede another Section 30. Yeah, I mean, I can't even remember, I don't think Liz Truss even got a letter because she wasn't speaking to Nicola. Boris Johnson, he was in for 2 years before it was a request. And Theresa May was now is not the time. Yeah, but, you don't just send a letter and say, what about it? Well, you do something about it when they say no, or now is not the time. By the sort of parliamentary interventions I spoke about, by doing something else in the Parliament, by mobilising popular demonstration. I mean, in 2017, there were huge popular demonstrations in Scotland, enormous, 100,000 people in Glasgow. I mean, more than we even got in the run-up to the referendum in 2014. And, members of the Scottish Government were looking down their noses. Who didn't want to be associated with the great unwashed in the streets. I mean, these things are absolutely essential because you have to have your political mobilisation in order to face down Westminster. I'm interested, what people say, because I think politics, one of the great ironies, is full of unintended consequences. If you go through history, establishments always do the wrong thing. This is we're in a democratic era now, so don't misunderstand anything I'm about to say. But the revolutionaries in the Easter Rising were spat at by the people of Dublin when they got arrested. Spat at. It was a minority pursuit. And then the British authorities decided to shoot them. Especially folk who couldn't even walk were suddenly executed, like Connolly. And what happened? The public opinion changed. From being despised and being rascals and rogues and ruffians, British government shoots a few, knocks, demolishes a quarter of Dublin in the middle of it anyway, and public opinion is transformed because the establishment overreacted. The same thing in Russia. The establishment overreacted. The suppression of trade union rights. In America, the establishment overreacted. And Lord Reid gave us a perfect illustration in this democratic, peaceful era of an establishment overreacting. Instead of just saying it's a bad case presented by the Scottish Government, which I have to say, you'd be perfectly entitled to say, but there's a really, I don't know how many of you have actually read the Supreme Court judgment. There's a wonderful paragraph which says, the Lord Advocate was very fair in her presentation, presenting arguments both for and against. Wait a minute. The Lord Advocate's meant to be our advocate. I mean, who wants to go into a court with your advocate going, I'm not sure, and the other guy saying, I'm sure? I mean, that sneering individual, James Eadie, the Treasury Counsel, he's summed up the first day of the proceedings by saying, well, if you can't even get your case past your own Lord Advocate, what are you doing here? And he was an arrogant, sneering individual, but that's something there was an element of truth in that, let's face it. So if they'd restricted themselves to saying, no, that was a bad case. But oh no, like all establishment, they overreached. He wasn't content with doing that. He wanted to smash the idea of Scottish sovereignty. He wanted to smash the idea of the Scottish nationhood. He wanted to smash the idea that Scotland had a right of self-determination. He actually says self-determination doesn't apply to Scotland. All right for other countries, all right for other nations, but not for Scotland. Is that what they taught him at George Watson's? Actually, probably is, come to think of it. But nonetheless, most folk in Scotland, and regardless of political persuasions, I mean, my late mother was a Tory most of her days until I became First Minister, or before I was elected, I beg your pardon. And then, she thought, out of family loyalty, she had to back me up when I became an MP. But, basically, she voted Tory before that, right? Much to my dad's great embarrassment, incidentally. The pair of them were hammered and tongs for all their married life. But you couldn't get a prouder Scot than my mum. And if somebody had said to my mother, Scotland's not a real nation, you're not entitled to be independent, she had a totally different view. She had bridled and said, of course we are! Of course we are! And that's why I hope the reaction from all of Scotland will be. Apart from, the Duke of Buccleuch and a few others, all of Scotland, regardless of what they think is right or wrong in the constitutional settlement, regardless of whether they're pro-EU or against the EU, regardless of whether they're on the left or on the right down the middle, or couldn't care less, regardless of, it's just a waste of time, I want to watch the game shows and the football, regardless of any and all of that, just on this issue, is Scotland a real nation? Are we equal with other nations? Have we got a huge amount to be proud of in what we've contributed to the world in the past and Scottish history? Because in that history, whatever mistakes we've made, and we've made one or two, we've never lacked pride, and we've never lacked self-respect. And I think what Lord Reid has done is trampled on Scottish self-respect I think in the old phrase, he's sat on a thistle, and he's going to pay for it.
Judging by the response to that, can I just ask Jordan, what would you like to see more of Westminster? Demurely and slightly accepting or a bit more of what Kenny Neal did? What are you up for? Kenny Neal. Well, I hope the MPs are listening. I'm going to move to closing remarks and wind-up remarks, and I'm going to ask Debbie what she'd like to say just to close the meeting.
Thank you. So I think what I'd like to say is that I've been taking the temperature of the electorate on the doorsteps in this ward for the last few weeks. And so many people that I've spoken to have said, yes, we would vote Alba, but we still feel like we need to give the SNP another chance. That we're giving them the benefit of the doubt. Now, this was before the decision the other day. However, since then, I've started to feel a real difference. People are angry and don't really understand why the Scottish Government has put us in this position. So what I would say to anyone who is in this ward, please don't give them any more chances. Please vote Alba number 1 on the 1st of December. Thank you.
Ken, I'm going to pass you for your closing remarks, and bear in mind the audience has given you full authority to continue with your campaign at Westminster.
I think we've got to remember just how difficult life is for people at the moment. And my real fear has always been that people would give up hope. And that's why what we have to do is to give people hope. We have to channel their despair into anger, and that applies as much in energy as it does on the Constitution. I've had campaigns I've been involved in before where it's easy to argue you don't pay. You can't do that with energy. But you can make it clear this isn't an accident. It's not because of Putin's war. It's a deliberate policy choice of a Tory government that is going to see people freeze and sadly some people die. And that isn't acceptable, and we're not going to take it. And similarly with the Constitution, we cannot simply have vacuous comments that it's undemocratic. I know it's undemocratic what Lord Reid has done. What are we going to do about it? Because it ties in with that energy issue that people just cannot wait. And that's why we've got to channel the anger. We cannot just simply meekly take it and be subservient. There are limits, there are lines that we will not cross because we're Democrats and non-violent. But there are steps that we can take to challenge and to stand up. And that's what our people need. It's what they want. It's what sadly a lot of our leaders have not been doing, and it's why we must either make them do it or remove them and get elected representatives that will.
Kenny and I have been campaigning together a long time. We were campaigning first in Broxburn and Uphall. Indeed, Kenny was the candidate for this constituency way back in the 1980s. We had 2 SNP MPs at Westminster in the 1980s. And when I was canvassing with Debbie on Saturday in Winchborough, I was recalling that the last time I could remember canvassing the roads in Winchborough was the day after Chernobyl blew up. In 1986, I think it was. And there was a local by-election. I think John Warner was the candidate, I think, if I remember correctly. Anyway, it was an absolute torrential downpour that day. It wasn't much different from Saturday, but it was a huge downpour. I remember that so well. And then when Chernobyl was the big news, and I went back to Livgay and I phoned up a pal that I used to work with in the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries, and I said to him, see all this stuff about the radioactivity, that's all press talk, it's all overblown. He said, what? He said, we've cancelled all milk production in Galloway because of the cesium levels and sheep production on the hills. So I immediately took all the clothes I'd on, canvas and winch, but I burnt them. So it must have been effective because I'm still here. But the point then is that we had 2 members of Parliament. Republican leader of the SNP, we had 4 members of Parliament for the SNP. But I knew that if we turned the national movement in Scotland into arguing a more progressive case, to declare itself as a social democratic party on the left of centre, took sides within Scotland as well as taking Scotland's side, as we said, if we appeal to the people on the right issues in proper terms, then we'd grow as a political party. I thought one day, far in the future, we'll replace the Labour Party as the dominant force in Scottish politics. That seemed impossible. It was an impregnable fortress. And now Alba are a bit like the SNP was to Labour back in the 1980s. You see, because it wasn't just the eventual thought you might replace the Labour Party. Incidentally, I didn't see that we'd adopt some of the Labour Party's worst characteristics in the SNP, but that's another story. I also knew that as the SNP moved forward, the Labour Party would respond to protect their political base. And so it happened during the 1980s and 90s. Every time the SNP won a by-election or even increased in the system's free opinion polls, all of a sudden the Labour Party rediscovered their long-lost enthusiasm for self-government. And there were things like constitutional conventions and campaigns for a parliament. Because I realised and understood that you had 2 roles if your objective was Scottish independence. Yes, of course, you wanted your political party to succeed ultimately, but you also saw the importance of progress of that political party in terms of what it did to the Scottish political spectrum. And Alba is exactly in that position. I tell you this, as soon as Alba, and I hope it's this coming Thursday, as soon as Alba makes a significant move forward, you'll see everyone else jump to protect their political base. There's nothing like a bit of competition to instill a bit of backbone in a political party. And Scotland desperately needs backbone at the present moment. We have never more needed backbone. I hope, Debbie's a very fine candidate. I hope she can supply, but above, that'd be a great candidate for this ward, an absolute fantastic councillor she would be. But I'll tell you this, Debbie makes that move forward next Thursday, and it'll be a significant event in Scottish politics in finding that backbone in Scotland's hour of need.
Thanks, Alex. And can I close this meeting on time? The guys at Indelie will be delighted with me. I'll get the time this evening. Can I start by thanking all of you very much for coming this evening and your contributions, which are really important. I think this week has taught us how important your role is going to be in the weeks and months that come. Really, it's time for the people of Scotland to rise, and you form a major part of that. So thank you very much for your participation and comments this evening. Can I thank, as ever, Denise, who successfully organised the 41st We have a book meeting with the help of West Lothian Alba. Thank you all very much indeed. Debbie, and in the same breath wish her every possible success in the next 6 days' time. And of course, I'd like to thank Kenny and Alex Salmond for being here this evening at such an important time in Scotland's history and such an important week. Thank you very much indeed.
I propose a vote of thanks to our chair, the inimitable Tasmina Ahmed-Sheikh.
And as we close, to all of you watching, thank you very much indeed for watching, and keep watching. Alba here to campaign with everyone to secure, resecure, regain our country's independence as soon as possible. With that, thank you, and thanks to Indelie for giving us the opportunity to take